Right. Okay. We are going to carry on in Shmuel Aleph, and I shall share the screen with you straight away. And right at the end of last week's shiur, Ivor Mindell spoiled the spoiler and told us what's going to happen. But of course, you'll all have forgotten that. So it's all very exciting. And what has happened here is, let's just recap the story. Shaul wants to kill David. David runs away to Nov. Doeg gives him, no, Doeg doesn't give him anything. Achimelech gives him some bread, which is the holy bread, and gives him Goliath's sword. Doeg watches it, sees it, reports it back to Shaul. Shaul has one of his Mishigassen and goes and kills via Doeg all the people in Nov. David runs away to a place, various places, to a cave, and then off he goes to somewhere else. I can't remember now. And then at the beginning of chapter 23, which is where we are, David has a pang of conscience and says the Philistines are waging war against Keilah. And he says to Hashem via the Urim V'Turim, shall I go and involve myself in this battle? And God says yes, and so he does. And then we find out that Shaul knows where he is. David then goes back to the Urim V'Tumim and says to God, will these people in Keilah hand me over to Shaul? And God says, yes, they will. And we spoke about that last week, and we wondered why they would hand him over. Since he's just saved them from the Plishtim, you'd expect them to look after him. And we said that, having seen what Shaul had done to Nov, they weren't taking any chances and they would save their own skins. So David was having none of it, and he decided that he would run away again from Keilah. And this time he went to the mountains in the desert of Ziph. And that's where we ended it. We'll just do from verse 14. It's on the screen for you. Vayeshev David Bamidbar. David dwelt in the desert. B'mitzadot. What word can you see in there?
Barbara says field.
No, that's because she's not there watching and looking at the screen, and she heard me say sadot, and it's not. It's sadot with a sadi, not with a sin. She would have known that if she would have not been in the kitchen. I can see her right at the back there. We'll tell her what it says. It's mem tzadik dalad vav taf mitzadot. What does that sound like to you? You've all been there, I guarantee.
Masada.
Yes, Masada, Masada. Masada in Hebrew is mitzada. And surprisingly, do you know what the word mitzada means? It's not a name. We think it's of it as a name of this place.
Well, Barbara says fortress.
She's right, of course. Barbara is always right. It's a fortress, and that is why it's called Masada, or Masada as we would call it in English. The word itself means a fortress or a stronghold. So when we say that David dwelt in the desert, b'mitzadot, doesn't mean that he was necessarily at Masada, because of course Masada hadn't been built yet. Masada was built towards the end of the Second Temple era, some 1,000 years after David HaMelech. So he couldn't have been dwelling in the Masada, as we would call it, the Mitzada, but he was dwelling in other strongholds. He was staying around in the strongholds. However, what we will see very shortly, at the end of this chapter anyway, we will see that David was actually in the area of Masada. Because where does he go to? A bit of a spoiler here, but where does he end up running off to? Very famous. Anybody know where David ran off to? You've all been there as well, and you've all read it on the little thingamajigs that you see on the way on the path. And you've read that David was there, and it was his stronghold, and he was hiding out there from his enemies. And it's close to Masada. How many more clues would you like?
Ein Gedi?
Yes, Ein Gedi. Well done, Paul. Ein Gedi. Ein Gedi is a place which is connected to David HaMelech. We'll see at the end of this chapter that he takes refuge in Ein Gedi. If you go to Ein Gedi, don't know when the last time you went. I went in the winter in January with my grandson when he came for his bar mitzvah trip. And if you go on the path up towards the first lot of waterfalls, there's lots of little, what they call little signs there, which tell you the story of what's going on. And quite a few of them talk about David HaMelech, where he was taking refuge in Ein Gedi. So, yeah, we're going to come to that in a minute. So he was in the desert, and he was in the desert of Ziph. At this time, he was in the desert of Ziph. I showed you where Ziph was last week. I'll show it you again. But ignore the one down here where I've done the journey to. This is Tel Ziph over here. This is the area that we are talking about. You can see it's just southwest of Hebron. And of course, Hebron is in the territory of which tribe? Have a guess, since David is there.
Yehuda.
Yehuda, correct. This is in the territory of Judah. This is David's natural constituency, if you like. This is where David is strongest. So he is hanging around this desert here. Now, it's quite interesting that I have put on this journey. You're going to see in a minute a place where he goes to, which is here, Ma'in. And so I thought, well, I'll see how far it is from Ziph. Now, it's 57 minutes from Ziph in a car, because you have to go all around the houses. But as you can see, as the crow flies, it's not very far. But this is all desert. You can see here, there's nothing going on here. It's all desert. And this area here is where David was hanging out, running away from Shaul. So let's go back to the text. So, verse 14, David dwelt in the deserts, in the strongholds, b'mtsadot, vayeshev bahar, b'midbar Ziph. Ziph. By the way, that's the Hebrew name, the Hebrew equivalent of a very famous English family. Anybody know who I'm talking about? Barbara? The Ziph family. And what are they famous for?
Marks and Spencer.
Marks and Spencer, correct. Marks and Spencer was started off by the Ziph family. And the Hebrew, the Israeli branch of the Ziph family are known as Ziph. Same word over there. Okay. Vayevakshuhu Shaul kol hayamim. Interesting word there. Saul was seeking him. He sought him. What's the root of, what word do you know from there? Vayevakshuhu. Yes, Paul. Yes, Barbara. You're muted.
It's a request.
It's a request. So what word are we talking about?
Levakesh, to ask for.
Levakesh, to ask for, and the most common word, Bavakasha, not very commonly used in Israel, except by expats. Bavakasha, which literally means with bakasha, a request. with a request, meaning please. So this is not quite the same, because what this is here, this is not seeking something with a please and a thank you. This is seeking in a sinister way. Vayavakshuhu Shaul. Shaul was seeking him. In other words, he was looking for him, and he was looking for him to do him harm. So Vayavakshuhu Shaul kolayamim. Shaul was seeking him all the time. Velo natano Elohim biyado. And God did not deliver him into his hands. By natural means, you would have expected that the king and his entire army would have been able to sniff out David wherever he was, because they knew more or less where he was. They knew he had been in Keilah. It surely was not beyond the wit of the king and all his resources to find David. And it's only because the author of Shmuel Aleph tells us, really, it's only because God did not deliver him into his hand that Shaul did not find him.
So it's very surprising, because he had 400 followers with him at least at that time. So you would have thought normally Saul would have been able to find him very easily.
Yeah.
If he was alone, maybe not. But with 400 followers or 400 plus, he should have been able to find him fairly quickly. And
if you remember from last week, it had swelled to 600. So you're right. Yeah. 600 men with him. He should easily have been able to find them. And I think that what this is telling us here is that, Hashem was on David's side, and Hashem protected him from Shaul at this particular point. And the author of Shmuel Aleph is telling us that in a sort of a semi-subtle way, that this was a sort of miraculous deliverance or non-deliverance of David into the hand of Shaul. Okay, now, so this is now where we ended up last time. Vayar David ki yatsa Shaul levakesh. There's that word again. Levakesh et nafsho. That's an expression which we see in Tanakh a few times, and it means to seek his soul, means to want to kill him. That's an expression. It's one of those euphemisms that the Tanakh uses. To seek, he sought his soul. He had gone forth to seek his soul. It wasn't that he wanted to go and save his soul, like the Jesus freaks that go around and want to save your soul. This is, he wanted to kill him. Levakeshet nafsho means to kill him. So David saw that Shaul had gone out to kill him. And David b'midbar zif b'chorsha. There's a machloket amongst the commentators as to what this means, chorsha. It's translated here as the forest. Anybody got a translation in front of them that's not this? Have you got your translation there, Michael? Your living Tanakh. I've got the Koren here. Let's have a look what the Koren says.
Mine is in the copse.
Okay, that's in a forest, I suppose, as well. A copse is a fancy word. See, he's got it differently. The Koren translates it according to a different explanation, and the Koren translates B'chorsha as a place name. He says he translates it as David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Choresh, at a place called
same
Choresh.
one. I've got the same translation.
You've got Choresh as a place. So it seems that there's a whole discussion about where this is. But either way, he was well hidden in a forest. It's a bit odd, really, because if you're in the desert of Ziph, you don't expect to find forests in deserts, do you really? So I think that's possibly why the people here and in your one there think that it's a place name rather than a forest. But either way, now then, Vayakom Yehonatan ben Shaul, and Jonathan, the son of Saul, arose. What strikes you as odd about that?
Did they mention his father's name?
Yes, Michael, you're quite right. Why do we need to know? No, why do we need to be told? Because we already know that Yehonatan was the son of Shaul. Anybody reading Shmuel Aleph has to know by now that Yehonatan is the son of Shaul. We don't have, every time it mentions David, we don't have David ben Yishai. We just have David. When he's first introduced to us, we told him he's David ben Yishai. When Yehonatan is first introduced many chapters ago, we were told that he was the son of Shaul. Why are we told over here specifically? Why does the Tanakh go out of its way to stress, as it were, that Yehonatan is ben Shaul? Any suggestions?
To contrast his behavior to that of his father.
Okay, yes, I think that's a good answer. He is contrasting his behavior to that of his father. His father is out to kill David, and Yehonatan is here clearly not to kill David, but to help him. Okay, that's a good answer. Any other suggestions?
He was conflicted as whether to support his father or David.
Yes, that's what occurred to me. I think that's right as well. That we're being told here that he is a Ben Shaul, and it's clearly he is torn between his father's loyalty to his father and his love and friendship of David. And we've had this before, haven't we, with this conflict? Right at the end of the last meeting of Jonathan and David, which was, remember, at the where he had the boy and the arrows. He shot the arrows as a sign that David should run off. I think it was at the end of chapter 22 or 21. Let's just have a look and see if we can find it. Chapter 22, was it the end of chapter 22? No, it must have been the end of chapter 21, I think. No, it's before that even. Yes, just the end of chapter 20, and it was the end of chapter 1 chapter. Right, there we go. The end of chapter 20, Jonathan and David, our famous story of Machar Chodesh. And right at the end of the chapter there on the screen for you, verse 42, and Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace and bear in mind that we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, may the Lord be between me and you and between my descendants and your descendants forever." And they depart. Jonathan goes back to his father. David goes on the run. And we see at the end of this chapter here, this conflict that Jonathan has, and we spoke about it in some detail when we did chapter 20. The conflict that Jonathan has between loyalty to his father, who he knows is behaving in an unreasonable manner, and his friendship and love for David. At this point in chapter 20, what does he choose? He chooses his father, because otherwise he could have, if he'd have chosen David, he would have gone off with David, wouldn't he? He would have not gone back to his father's house, to his father's table, but he does. So at the end of the day, at the end of chapter 20, blood is thicker than water. And he goes where he's to his family. He goes back to his father, the king. But clearly, he is still very much in love, let's say, and you can interpret that whichever way you wish, with David, because he still finds the opportunity here in chapter 23, where we're up to arise and go and find David. Now, presumably, if Jonathan could find David on his own, Shaul could have found him with all his resources. Yes, you'd agree with that? Mm-hmm. And that, of course, links in to the previous verse 14. Hashem did not deliver him into his hand.
Except of course, David would have made himself available to Jonathan, so he'd allow himself to be found by Jonathan, whereas he'd be more careful about Saul's.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. But Jonathan's still got to go and find him, and he couldn't have sent him an email and said, "I'll meet you at the," or an SMS, and say, "I'll meet you at the," opposite McDonald's. So yeah, I take your point, but I think it's an interesting thing that Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the forest, or he went to Choresh, depending on which translation you want. Now then, what's all this about? Vayechazek et yado belohim, and he strengthened his hand through God. Who is strengthening whose hand, and what's God got to do with it, and what's it all about? What does that mean? What do you understand by that expression? Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David to the forest, and he strengthened his hand through God. And he offers, who's strengthening whose hand?
I can tell you what Steinsaltz says.
Go on then.
And he, Johannesson, encouraged him, David, by the words of God. Alternatively, the verse means that he encouraged him by assuring him that God was with him.
So on both points, does Rav Steinsaltz say it's Jonathan doing the encouraging?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody think it might be the other way around? That David is encouraging Jonathan? I tend to think that what Rav Steinsaltz is saying is probably the simple pshat. But you often find in Tanakh, and I'll give you an example in a moment, you often find in Tanakh that we have a situation where we have he did something to him, and we're left with a little bit of doubt as to who's doing what to who. And I think it's deliberate because I think it's there's an element of mutuality going on, and it's part of the beauty, if you like, of Tanakh, that it's open to interpretation. Who can think of an example in Tanakh where we have a situation where we say he did something to him, and the Mefarshim are asking questions? Well, who's the subject and who's the object?
Moshe and Hashem, often it says, you're never sure.
Okay, that's a good one. We talked about that, didn't we? I don't know if you heard the Tefillah Shiur from last Monday, but we talked about that because we talked about Hashem, Hashem, Kel, Rachum, V'chanun, didn't we? And what do we say? Vayered Adonai be'anan v'yetyatzei v'mosham vayikra b'shem Adonai. Vayered Adonai be'anan, and Hashem came down in a cloud. Vayityatzei imosham, and he stood him there with him. Vayikra b'shem Hashem, and he called out in the name of Hashem. Okay, and we pointed out.
Hashem.
Sorry.
You said that was Hashem talking.
Yes, we pointed out that it could be either, couldn't it? Vayikra b'shem Hashem. Intuitively, you would think it would be Moshe called out in the name of Hashem. But when you looked at the translations, all the translations had a capital H for he. And the Mefarshim, that's based on the Mefarshim, and the Mefarshim say, no, it was Hashem himself who called out and taught us this Shlosh Esrei Midot, the 13 attributes, Hashem, Hashem, Kel, Rachum, V'chanun. So that's a very good example, Barbara, of where there is some ambiguity about who is doing the action. The fact that in English there is a capital H for the God's being he helped us out in that translation, but that's based on the Mefarshim who debate that. So that's a good example. Any other examples? I'm thinking of a very famous example in Sefer Bereshit. Let me see, while you're thinking, if I can find it in the Chumash. I'll give you a clue. One of the two people is Yaakov.
And Esau.
Go on. It's not what I'm thinking of, but maybe you're right. Maybe there is one.
Where he kisses him on his neck.
Oh, Okay, let's have a look at that. That will be in Parashat Vayishlach. There we go. I'm looking at Parashat Vayishlach now. Let's see, what does it say about him kissing? Okay, yes, let's have a look at this. Well, I'm going to read you let's put it on the screen. It's chapter 33, verse 5. Let's go and have a look at that, courtesy of Chabad. By the way, this is such a wonderful resource. I should really give some credit to Chabad for giving us this opportunity to do this so easily. Chapter 33, there it is. Verse 4. Vayarot Esav likrato. And Esav ran toward him. Vayirchabakehu. And he embraced him. Vayipol al tzarav. And he fell on his neck. Vayishakehu. And he kissed him. Vayivku. And they wept. Now, on the face of it, I think you're right, Michael. On the face of it, this wasn't what I was thinking of either, but it's a good one. On the face of it, Esav is the subject and is doing all the hugging and kissing and falling on the neck. You will see the Vayishakehu. Can you see there? There are dots on the top of that word. Can you see that? Over there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I can make this screen any bigger, but take it from me, there are dots on the top of that word. There are also dots in a Sefer Torah on that word. And the Mefarshim all say that is to tell you that Esav's kiss to Yaakov was not what it seemed. Some of the Mefarshim quote a midrash, which you'll be very familiar with from your kindergarten days, that when he wasn't trying to kiss him, what he was trying to do was bite his neck. That's right. And what happened, Michael, with this wonderful midrash when he tried to bite his neck? You don't remember? Okay. Go on, Paul.
Turned to stone?
We're very good. It turned to marble, apparently. Okay, and therefore Esav broke his teeth. That's a very famous midrash that we all learned when we were kids. Not to be taken necessarily literally, but to indicate that Esav may not have been entirely genuine in his affection for Yaakov, although there are some Mefarshim, in the minority, one has to say, who accept that Esav was genuine at this point, and this was a genuine hug, and it was a genuine brotherly kiss. But yes, you could. That's another one. The one that I was thinking of is a little bit later, but it also involves falling on the neck. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yosef?
Yosef.
Yes, Yaakov and Yosef. I'm just busily trying to find where it was. It's in Parashat Vayigash. If Ruby was here, he'd tell me exactly what pasuk it was, and if David was here, he'd tell me which aliyah it is in Parashat Vayigash. But neither of them are here, so you'll have to bear with me while I find it. I can't find it. Here, I found it. Very good. Okay. It is in chapter 47, verse 30. Let's go to that. Chapter 47, verse 30. What am I talking about?
No.
Verse chapter 46. Here, Lieberman. Verse 46. Chapter 46, verse 30. There we go. There we go. Verse 29. Right. He sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to direct him to Goshen. Joseph harnessed his chariot and he went up to meet Israel. Vaya'al likrat Yisrael aviv. He went up to meet Israel, his father, to Goshen. Vayera elav, and he appeared to him. Vayipol al tzavarav, and he fell on his neck. Vayef al tzavarav, and he wept on his neck, od, for a long time. Who's weeping on whose neck?
Could be either.
What'd you say, Anita? Verse 29.
What did you say?
Oh, could be either, really, couldn't it?
Could be either, exactly. That's the whole point. Could be either. In fact, the Mefarshim all speak about this at length. Many of them say that this was Joseph falling on his father's neck, and that his father did not react. And they ask why his father did not react. And they say because he was saying Shema at the time. A bit shvach. But then they go further to say, actually, what he was saying was he was giving thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for that particular moment, and that we should learn that at the peak of our happiness, as he no doubt was, having just been reunited with his beloved son, that we should not forget that the source of this happiness ultimately is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the most of the Mefarshim say that this ambiguity there is in favor of Joseph, as it were, that Joseph was the one who was weeping. They talk about this in a very interesting and rather logical way. Why do you think that most of the Mefarshim think that it was Joseph doing the weeping here rather than Jacob?
Joseph was the subject.
One at a time. Sorry, I didn't hear that. Let's start with Michael.
Joseph was the subject, and Joseph harnessed. It's Joseph. He's the subject. He's the main character in that particular sentence.
Okay, so stylistically, Joseph is more likely to be the subject. That's true. Anita?
Well, Yosef knew that he was going to meet his father, so he already knew he was going to meet Yaakov. Yaakov didn't know he was going to see Yosef, so he was probably in total shock.
No, Yaakov did know. He was told, "Oh, Yosef Chai, Yosef is still alive."
Yeah, but seeing him in person, he was probably in total shock.
Okay, so okay, and he thought he was dead. All right, okay. There's a very simple and more logical.
Joseph could have told his father all those years where he was, and he didn't. So he felt a bit of remorse, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There's the Mefarshim all talk about that. Yosef could have sent a message, especially when he was already the viceroy. You know, he could have sent some leper up the road to Canaan to tell his father.
There's no video.
That whole story there is that why he didn't is a subject of a whole many things. But there's one other simple reason why I say that Joseph is the most likely person to weep. Who do we see in the Torah weeping more than anybody else?
Hannah was weeping.
Hannah wept once, yes. How many times did Joseph weep? Joseph's weeping all over the place. Every time his brothers come down, he's weeping. He's a proper emotional wreck. Joseph has got form. He's a weeper, right? Before this, he's wept every time. He has to excuse himself and sending everybody out because he's weeping that much. He's a very emotional person, Joseph. And this is his personality. He sees his father, he weeps on his neck for a long time. Od, it means he doesn't want to let him go. And I think all of the things that you said are all correct. The fact that he felt remorse that he hadn't spoken to his father for 22 years, because even though there might have been a good reason why he didn't do it, because he thought his father was in on the plot, Nevertheless, when he found that out, that it wasn't, he felt that remorse, and he should have done. I'm sure that's absolutely right. So Joseph is the subject of the pasuk. So it seems, but there's the point that I wanted to make, and I've laboured it really, is that there is an ambiguity there, and I think that we go back here to our pasuk, and he strengthened his hand through God, is also that ambiguity. You all thought that Jonathan was the one doing the strengthening of David's hand through God. And I just wonder whether there's a bit of ambiguity there, that David is saying to Jonathan, who's put his life on the line again, to actually going to find David, that David gives him chizuk and says, don't worry, you'll be okay. Hashem will look after you, because what he's done is put it, if Shaul already is not happy with Jonathan from the previous episode, remember, if Shaul finds out that Jonathan has been to David again, you can imagine Shaul's reaction. And I think there's an element there maybe of David strengthening Jonathan as well. And I think, again, the ambiguity is deliberate there by the author of Shmuel Aleph. Okay.
As Barbara's pointed out, for me anyway, in the very next verse it says, and he said to him, "Be not for the hand of my father's Shaul." So it does rather very strongly imply that it's Jonathan that's saying this.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, you all said it was Jonathan strengthening David, and I think that's right. But I think the ambiguity is there to allow us another interpretation, that it could be David. I'm not saying it's a 50-50, but I think there's an opportunity there to interpret that as David as well, giving this mutual strengthening through Hashem. So let's carry on. What did Jonathan say? Vayomer elav, he said to him, Al tira, do not fear, ki lo timtsa'acha yad Shaul avi. The hand of my father Saul will not find you. Okay, so what's he telling him there? He's telling him, I'm not going to go back and tell him where you are. Right?
He's probably got spies in Saul's camp who tells him where he's going, etc.
Yeah, so Jonathan is saying, don't worry.
Don't be afraid.
Sorry, what did you say, Johnny?
So don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid, yeah, because David might see Jonathan and think, oh my goodness, Jonathan knows where I am now. That means Shaul's going to know where I am, because Shaul's going to be keeping tabs on Jonathan. Jonathan says, don't worry, he won't find you. And what's more, Jonathan gives some kind of nevuah. We're not told that Jonathan is a prophet. And maybe this isn't prophecy, but it does have the ring of prophecy, doesn't it? Va'ata timloch al Yisrael. You will reign over Israel. Now, if he's a prophet, if it was Shmuel saying that, that would have some great power. It may not be. It may just be Jonathan saying, that's my gut feeling. It's not something that's come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I just know, David, you are destined for great things. You're going to be Melech Yisrael. Va'anochi eyeh lecha. And I will be to you le mishneh. Mishneh. What does that word mean? Anita?
From the word second, Schnei.
Yes, correct. From the word second, from Sheni. I will be your second in command. Translated here as viceroy. Let me ask you this question.
He's saying, may I be. He didn't say I will be. He said, may I be. He's asking him if you become king.
Yeah, that's what it says here. What does your translation say, Michael?
17.
I will be.
And I will be, and Steinsaltz, yeah.
And I will be. I don't like this translation here. And may I be. I don't think he's asking a question. I think when it says "May I be," you haven't got a question mark here on there. I think what it means is, "May I be," in other words,
polite way of asking.
Yehi may it be Hashem's will that I will be your. He's not saying, please make me into your viceroy. He's saying, may it be Hashem's will, or as I prefer. And what do you have there in Steinsaltz? Has will I be? I will be. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
What do you have, Michael?
I will be your second in command.
Yeah. So he's saying, you will be the king, and I will be there with you. I'll be your second in command.
Steinsaltz, excuse me, and I, and then in brackets, got your good friend, your dear friend, your dear friend.
Okay, so that's what he's saying. He's saying, I'll be there with you. So I was going to ask you about this word mishneh. How old were you when you first heard the word viceroy?
Clive of India.
Who?
Clive of India.
So how old were you when you heard that?
Oh, history, long time ago. I don't know.
Girl, I
secondary,
was.
secondary school, yeah, secondary school.
How
about you, Barbara? When did you first hear the word viceroy?
I think with Joseph was the viceroy in Egypt.
Yeah, well, that was for me. I was about 5 when I heard that. I had never clue what it was. What's a viceroy? For goodness sake. And of course, what we had to have it explained to us when it was the second in command. And the reason that we should have not been used the word viceroy is we should have been taught that this word Mishneh LaMelech means the second in command to the king. That happens to be a fancy English word, viceroy. When was the last time you used it in your everyday conversation? Not very often.
It's in the Megillah somewhere, the Mishneh.
Mishneh LaMelech, correct? Yeah, absolutely. Who was Mishneh LaMelech in the Megillah?
Haman.
Actually, I don't think Haman is described as Mishneh LaMelech. I could be wrong, but Mordechai is definitely later on described as Mishneh LaMelech. I'm not sure, and I'll check, but I don't think Haman is actually referred to as Mishneh LaMelech. I mean, he is effectively Mishneh LaMelech because he's given the ring and everything, but I'm not sure that he's actually described as. If David was here, he would be able to tell us, but I'll have to look it up. But definitely Mordechai is described as Mishneh LaMelech. You're right about that. Okay, so what's happening here is really interesting. And let's just finish the pasuk. V'gam Shaul avi yodea kain. And you know what, David? My father knows it too. He knows he's finished. He knows you're going to be the king. So what is Jonathan saying? Jonathan is saying, I know you're going to be the king of Israel and I'm going to be your number 2. So what would you expect to happen now? What would you expect Jonathan to do?
Bow down or kiss him or...
Okay, but you would expect him to at least stay with him.
Yeah.
Right? Remember, there's a battle going on between Shaul and David. Right? He's got the same dilemma, hasn't he, that he had at the end of chapter 20. The end of chapter 20, he had this dilemma. Jonathan is torn at the end of chapter 20, which I showed you before, between David and Shaul. And what does he do? David goes off, running off, and Jonathan goes back to Shaul. Here, he's one step on. He's now accepting, he's predicting, he's praying for David to be the king and him to be the viceroy. But Shaul is still his father. So he's still got this conflict.
Ruler of the colony.
He's still got this conflict of David or Saul. But now he's expressing even more support for David. He's saying, I know you're going to be the king, and I'm going to be your second in command. It's a massive thing for Jonathan to say. Why is it such a massive thing for him to say? Because
he's getting rid of his father.
More than that, Johnny, more than that. Who is destined to be the king after Shaul?
Him.
By
He won't be king.
natural means.
He's giving up his own
Correct.
giving up
He's
his own priorities.
His own position. That's right. This is massive. What Jonathan is doing here is massive. He is saying, I know you are going to be king, in brackets, and not me. And you know what? I'm happy for you, David. I'm happy to be your second in command. I am willing to give up my position as the heir apparent, the Prince Regent, Prince of Wales, right? I am willing to give up that position for you because you are going to be the king. And I will, inverted commas, only be your second in command. It's a massive thing for Jonathan to do.
But surely he knew this already. They were friends. I'm sure that David would have told Jonathan that he's been anointed to be the next king. So he must have known it already for a long time.
There's knowing it, I think, Michael. I think you're right. He probably was aware that had gone on from Jonathan. But here he's now got to the point where, perhaps because he sees his father's behavior is deteriorating, and he can see that David is supported by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, maybe now this is the full realization of that fact, or at least the verbalization of that fact to David is another step. Yes, Johnny.
Rabbi Steinsaltz says in the Apostle before, you will reign over the land, and he's put in brackets or a little note, in accordance with God's promise. Who knows about God's promise?
All right, so that would definitely support Michael's view that he knew. So I would have expected at this point Jonathan to have made the decision to say, okay, I've made the decision now. Jonathan says, you are going to be the king, David, not me. You are going to prevail over my father, and therefore I am going to stay with you and abandon my father's table. But he doesn't. He's still got that conflict. Look what goes on now. Verse 18. Vayichratu shnehem brit. And they cut a covenant, the two of them. Lifnei Hashem. Before Hashem. Now, when have you seen...
They already done that.
Thank you. You answered my question before I asked it. The question was going to be, when did you see them do a covenant before? Where was that, Paul?
Just after the arrows incident, immediately after.
Okay, it was actually 2 times before that David and Jonathan have cut a covenant. The first one is in chapter 18. Let's have a look at it. There it is, chapter 18. This was right at the beginning of their relationship. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Now, what do you see there? Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. What? Yes, Barbara.
It was only Jonathan. It was only Jonathan making the covenant, not both of them.
Yeah, we spoke about this a bit, didn't we? This is a bit of a one-sided affair, this, if you like. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him. We don't see that David loved Jonathan as Jonathan loved David. Okay, that's the first covenant. The second covenant is the one that Paul was referring to. There it is. Verse 16 in chapter 20. This is the arrows business, as you say. Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, and may the Lord demand it from the hand of David's enemies. Who made the covenant? Jonathan. Let's go to our covenant. Covenant number 3.
Excuse me, except he goes on to say, Jonathan, he made David swear as well. So it's a joint one.
Jonathan continued to make David swear?
No, he's made a covenant.
You've got to admit it's not quite the same as our chapter here. All right. Okay. All right. I'm gonna take that on board, and I'm gonna say this: the one in chapter 18 is completely one-sided. The one in chapter 20 is David is okay in it, but he's got to be pushed into it. He's got to be made to do it by Jonathan.
20.
Our one here in chapter 23.
The two of them.
The two of them made a covenant. Vayichratu shnehem. They both did it. There's no distinction now between Jonathan and David. So thank you to Paul, who in his attempt to disprove me has actually made my argument stronger. And we have a progression of David's willingness to enter into a covenant with Jonathan. Jonathan's is the leader in this relationship at the beginning. And by the time we get to this point, they're both making a covenant together. They're equal partners in the covenant at this point. And one of the other point that's relevant is the other two covenants do not mention the fact that it was Lifnei Hashem. This covenant has got a stronger character to it because it's Lifnei Hashem. Paul's got knitted brows again. He wants me to go back and look at the other covenants to see that I'm right. Let's have a look at them.
Rav Steinsaltz says the two of them again established a mutual covenant before the Lord.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, that fits in with Paul's progression.
Yeah.
There's the second covenant. Okay, Ubikesh Hashem. It doesn't say Lifnei Hashem. Mentions Hashem there in David's words, not in Jonathan's words, not David's. And the first one, they just made a covenant, no mention of God at all. So again, a progression. So I rest my case. I think that I've got a strong case here that this covenant is getting stronger from David's perspective as we've gone along. Either way, they make a covenant, and then look what happens. Something which surprised me. David stayed in the forest or in Choresh, depending on which way you want to say it, and Jonathan went to his home. I'm surprised at that. They've just made a third covenant. Jonathan has said, David, you are going to be the king and I am going to be your number two. And then he deserts him again. He goes back to his...
He doesn't desert him because he by going back to Saul, he can actually effectively be a spy, so he protects David.
Well, that would be all well and good if that's what happened.
And maybe he would arouse suspicion if he never returned back.
Well, he's got to put. I think he's got to put his money where his mouth is. The fact is, Michael, that isn't what happened. Sorry to spoil the story and everything, but what happens is he goes back and Jonathan throws his lot in, as it were, with his father, and he pays the price because ultimately, I'm going to give you a spoiler here, ultimately, Shaul and Jonathan die on the same day in battle against the Plishtim. And Jonathan never gets to be David's second in command. So this prayer of his never gets to be fulfilled. And it never gets to be fulfilled, perhaps, because Jonathan, terribly conflicted though he was, I would not like to have been in Jonathan's position to have had to choose between my father and my best friend, who I think is going to be the next king and take over from my father. What a wonderful story this is. I mean, it's got everything. It's got all the features of a wonderful story. It's got twists and plots and pathos. And Jonathan's in a very, very difficult position. And in my view, what the hell does it matter what I think? But in my view, Jonathan made the wrong decision here. He should have stayed with David. He should have had the courage of his convictions. And I hesitate to criticize Jonathan. It's not really fair because out of all the people in this whole story, he is the biggest hero of all. And he is a tragic hero in the end. He could have come straight out of a Greek tragedy, this, because Jonathan is caught between the proverbial rock and a hard place. He chooses the rock, and I think he should have chosen the hard place in this particular point. But there you go. As I say, what difference does it make what I think? So there we are. David has stayed in the forest. Jonathan went to his home. And now look what happens. A little bit more treachery. We've got a couple of minutes, so let's just do a bit of treachery. Let's wish Michael Mazal Tov. Michael is going to disappear to be Sandak.
Mazal Tov.
Hands firm, eyes closed. Mazal Tov.
Mazal
Enjoy.
Tov.
And please let us know what the baby's called.
Ruth to you all. Thank you.
Mazal
It's going to have to be Jonathan.
Yes, it has to be Jonathan. Yes, the baby has to be called Jonathan. You're right. Okay, so let's just finish off by seeing a little bit more treachery here. David has gone to this place in the wilderness of Ziph, and in this place called Choresh, and the Ziphites went up to Shaul, Vaya'alu Zifim el Shaul Hagiv'ata, to Giv'ah. So at this point, where is Saul? Saul's been out looking for David, but at this point he's gone home. Giv'ah is which Giv'ah are we talking about? Giv'ah means a hill, but which Giv'ah are we talking about? Have a guess.
Giv'at Zev.
No.
No.
Have another guess.
Giv'at.
Who are we talking about here?
Shaul.
Givat Shaul.
Givat Shaul, yes. He's gone to Givat Shaul, which is where he lives. So he's no longer looking for David. He's given up at this point because he can't find him. And he can't find him because God has made it that he can't find him. Jonathan found him okay, but Shaul can't find him. So he's gone home. Well, how do we know? Because the Ziphites went to Saul to Givah. And he said, and they say, hello, David, but mistater imanu. Is David not mistater? What's the root of that word? Seter, which means?
Hiding, to hide.
Hiding.
Yeah,
Secret.
in secrecy.
Secret.
Seter is in secrecy, in hiding. Is David not hiding imanu with us? Bimtzadot, in the stronghold, Bachorsha, in this place called Choresh, or the forest, Begivat HaHachila, in the hill of Hachila, Asher Mimin HaYeshimon, which is in the south of the desolate wasteland. He's just about given him David's absolute coordinates there. He couldn't have done it any better if he'd have sent him a Waze little pin. That's what he's done here. He sent him what we call in Hebrew a mikum. He sent him one of those little red things that pop up on your Waze and says, I'm here, right? He's hiding with us. I'll tell you where he is. He's in the strongholds. Where? Which strongholds? In Choresh. Well, which ones? In the hill of Achila. Where's that? It's in the south of there. These people have gone to Shaul and they've grassed him up good and proper, right? David his whereabouts have been absolutely pinpointed. And then they say, Ve'ata, and now, L'chol avat nafshecha, to the desires of your heart, the same word as ta'ava, or the te'avon here, the desires of your heart, of Hamelech, Laredet, raid. And now, if you want to come down, you come down. Velanu hasgiru biyad Hamelech, and we will hand him over. We will shut him up. Hisgiru, from lisgor, to close him in. We will close him in into your hand. These Ziphites are absolutely treacherous towards David. And what are they doing? Of course, they're trying to ingratiate themselves with the king because Shaul is the king. And Shaul is very happy about this, and he gives them a bracha. And we'll stop here. Vayoma Shaul says, Baruchim atem Lashem. Baruchim atem Hashem. May Hashem bless you. Ki chamaltem alai. You have taken pity on me. That's a very weird thing to say for the king. And we'll discuss that next week because we're out of time. Right.
Next week.
Sorry, what did you say, Aminita?
Next week is Chag.
You're right. So it won't be next week. It will be the week after, which will be Erev Yom Kippur. I'm not even sure we'll do one on Erev Yom Kippur. We'll see. We might be a bit busy, but we'll see. If it's not then, it will be after the Chagim, because the one after that is... no, it's not. The one after that is Sukkot. Yeah, it's Yom Tov in those far-off, distant lands of Yom Tov Sheni, but we don't go into that. So we will do the next one when we do the next one, and we will talk about that. So what have we done today? We talked about Jonathan turning up. He could find him. Hashem did not give David's whereabouts through to Shaul, but Jonathan found him. Jonathan is conflicted here, but he recognizes that David is going to be the next king. He wants to be his viceroy, but he doesn't have the courage of his convictions at this point to join David's band of merry men. He goes back to his father. But before they did that, the two of them made a mutual covenant. The first time we see a mutual covenant here between David and Jonathan, and then we see some treachery by the Ziphites. On the way, we had a look at some ambiguity in the Torah with falling on necks with Esav and Yaakov and Joseph. What else did we see? We saw all sorts of interesting words, and we talked about Masada as well. All that in an hour. Amazing. Right. Any questions for today's offering?
Just
Okay.
to say the word viceroy, it comes from something. Roi is French for king, so it's to have authority for the king or whatever.
Yeah, vice being the word that we use for a vice president. Okay, a vice president is not a president who does bad things, although there are those that do that. Vice being as in vices.
Vice is in the president himself.
Yes, exactly. So a vice-roi is what you're saying, Anita.
Yes, roi is king in French. Yes,
yeah,
so that's where it comes from.
And of course, the word roy is the same word as royalty.
Yeah.
Yeah, which comes from the French. Yeah. Okay. All right. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Shana Tova.
Tomorrow night at 8:30, we will be doing Unatana Tokef.
Oh, lovely.
Okay, so 8:30 tomorrow night for Unatana Tokef. Oh, tonight, let me stop the recording, by the way. Don't want to hear all this stuff because it will be too
Wednesday
late.
morning, will there be a share Wednesday? You've got the teal, Johnny.
No, if I'm on a teal, it won't be a shiur.
Right.
How do I stop this recording? I have no idea. There it is. Stop recording. There we go. Yes.